Hey, what's up turtles? Krik here with Blackout Outdoors. Today's video is going to be sort of an introduction to some of the tools I've been using for my leather work. But before I get into the tools, I want to show you some things I've made to help give you an idea with what I have and my skills to show you potentially what you can make if you have some of these tools. So to start off, here is a wet molded lighter holder. Pull this out. See it's keeping its shape in there. Hard. You've probably seen this in a video. Saddle stitched, riveted. Not going to be using these rivets pretty much for anything anymore, just for sake of strength. But this is really nice. I really like this. Wet molded. Next we have a keychain for my rig keys. Snap here. Copper rivet down here. If I'm going to be using rivets, it's going to be copper rivets from now on. Basically, it's like a dangler almost. About my keychain. This is just a small card and cash holder. Really simple design. Natural veg tan leather. Saddle stitched. Same stitching. Real slick in the pocket. You've probably seen these on Instagram if you follow us on Instagram or Facebook. This is a wide mouth glass jar, leather wrapped, two-turn handle. This is mine. I've been using it. Like I said, these rivets are on here. The ones I have been making and have up for sale are all stitched, but I was just trying out different stuff. Usually I keep the things I don't like. I keep them and use them. Here is an older sheath I made months and months and months ago for the Brothers of Bushcraft blade. Fire steel loop. These rivets again here. This is like a little Western style sheath. I kind of like this. It's kind of fun looking at my old work, seeing the mistakes or the skills I didn't have yet, but still pretty proud of things I made 5 months ago. Sheath for the SE4, snap here. This is the knife that cut me on my foot. The reason why I got into leather work in the first place was because I had surgery. Dropped this knife on my foot as I was sharpening it, severed a tendon, so needed a new hobby since I'm stuck inside. And leather work, one. This was all handmade. You can see back here this stitching. See how wonky that is, just all punched through with an awl. More than functional, but see the small details of this. Real classic looking sheath for a survival knife. And you've probably seen this, oh actually this was in the dangler video we did not too long ago. Sheath for the Moor Companion. You've already seen me touch on this a lot. Talked a lot about this sheath in that video, but this is the last sheath I made, which is probably about 4 months ago at this point. I'm really excited to make some more now that my skills have progressed. I have a scrap piece of leather with me here today to show you some of the tools I have and how they actually work on the leather. So to start off, you're going to need some cutting implements. Need some knives. And here is a folding utility knife. Cobalt is the company, and it's important to have a very, very sharp knife. These are disposable blades, but actually I strap these blades, and yeah, they don't hold the best edge, but nonetheless, it definitely sharpens them for the time being. And I have a smaller little X-Acto knife. This is actually Excel, the company, but this is for smaller little detailed work. And these are the two knives I use to actually cut out the patterns or just do small little, if I was a square, I'll use a small X-Acto style knife to round off a square or something like that. But basically, obviously a sharp knife is used to cut through the leather. And this is 8 to 9 ounce leather. Pretty much everything I've made so far has been out of 8 to 9 ounce leather, barring I did actually get some 6 to 7 ounce, which the little card cash holder was made out of. Sharp knife is very important. I use this even to cut round on this roundness on my card holders. Is cut with this too, just very slow, and I scored a couple times to keep that rounded. So first of all, you need a couple sharp knives. I've actually used a more to cut some leather out when I was first starting, but something like this works really well. Now the next tool is called an Overstitch wheel. There's actually 2 different sizes in the bag of these wheels, and these sort of peaks are spaced out at different increments, different ones. So what you can do with this is actually you can buy these things called rakes that I have sort of things set out. But basically the way I can use it is decide which one I want to use. Say this is the side of my project and I want to set the stitching holes. You can go like this, run this through it, and then I have these little holes made, or little spaced out stitching holes. Also, once you're finished with your project or have done stitching it, I use waxed synthetic thread. You can also take your Overstitch wheel and go back over what you just stitched to seat it a little bit nicer. And I might come back to that because I want to show you something first I should have showed. It's just called a stitch groover. It's this cool little tool that has, this is sort of just a gauge or a spacer depending on the side of, or whatever you want to use. I'll show you what that looks like, but let me get another example. And basically what this does is, put it over here, and as I sort of, this will keep this at a given set distance from the edge, and as I pull this on it, it's taking off that top piece of leather, and it's making a little stitch groove. I keep going through this, do it once with light pressure to make sure I'm staying good. I can keep going over it now until I get a nice recessed stitching bed. And what that does is obviously, or maybe not obviously, this will allow the stitching to sit flush or even below flush with the surface of the leather. You try to get a profile of this, see how the stitching is sitting down from the, it might be raised a little bit, but what this does is to sit it down so it just protects the stitching from wear. And where this really comes in important is if you're making a sheath, the underside of this, the stitching that's on the belt loop, that's, you can imagine that's on the underside, the inside of the sheath, is very important because when you're putting the knife in, you don't want any raised stitching on the inside of the sheath. But that's what is the stitch groover. And like, you know, just depending if you're gonna put a second line in, you can open this up a little bit. Go back to the piece. Oops. You can put a parallel line to it if you're gonna do 2 stitching beds. And as I'm backing up, I'll show you the stitching wheel again. If I want to run this in here, just put my spacing. Like I said, you can do this with things, I believe they're called rakes, or they're sort of just like something you'd punch through the leather, and there's little prongs to keep it consistent. Because what I use so far, I have been using, depending if I'm going to use the Dremel, I will use the Dremel to stitch, put holes, or I'll use this scratch awl. And the scratch awl is really nice for a few reasons. You can put your pattern on top of the leather. You can see I can make a shape. Imagine I'm tracing a pattern. I can use it for that. I can also use it to scratch surface if I'm going to be contact cementing something together to give a little bit, obviously rough it up, give it some texture to help a better bind, or bond, excuse me. You can use it to do that. I can use it to punch through, and I do use it to make holes in that leather wrap mason jar you've seen. But basically, you know, you use it just like an awl. Use a mallet, you know, push through the material and keep moving. And actually, since I'm here, show you. If I am going to be punching through leather with this, I'm going to have at least one other layer of leather underneath my working piece. Oops. And I can continue this down. It's very time intensive using a single awl like this, but nonetheless it's more than possible to do it. And this is pretty much one of the only times I'll use a machine to do anything, is if I'm going to be drilling holes through really thick leather like on the knife sheaths. I'll use the Dremel for that, but like I said, there are some things where I use this to punch the holes. And obviously in addition to the awl, you need a mallet. Not a hammer, you need a mallet. This is like one of the cheaper ones from Tandy. You can get ones that are just basically rolled leather, or you can get really, really nice ones. But this is one I've been using, and it works okay for the most part. Next we have some edge bevelers, and I have two different types in here. I'll show you what they actually do in a moment. This is actually a rounded one. And for instance, let me show you on a project piece. Is that if you notice on these edges, they're rounded, coming from the welt, and they're rounded over. Might be hard to see because it's dark, but I'll show you on this, on my scrap leather. Is that when you take this on the side and say we have our stitch bed, we establish that this is the distance we want it from the edge. You want to do this after you used your stitch groover, because once I push this, see how it rounded that edge? I like using this one. This is sort of rounded, the tool itself, and it's really small detail, but it's rounded. The cutting edge, if you will, is rounded. Convex, concave, depending which side you're looking at it, which way you're holding it. I like this one better. It's just a little bit cleaner job to the edge, but the other one I have is just a flat cutting surface. And again, it's used the same exact way, but it just is flat. Sort of gives a 45-degree angle, as opposed to rounding it a little bit better than the previous one I showed. And these are all different sizes, meaning it's the appropriate size is used on the thickness of leather, because the size depends on pretty much how much leather it's taking off. So you have thin leather, obviously you don't be using the same size as opposed to this 8 to 9 ounce leather. And all these steps, like I said, for me personally, the things I've been making, I'm trying to make them as nice as I possibly can. That takes longer, and subsequently it'll cost more if I'm selling this. But for me personally, I want to make the items as nice as I possibly can and as durable as I possibly can. So just keep that in mind as I'm showing things. And it's up to you to decide how good of, or sort of how long you want to take, or how nice you want to make something. The next tool I have here is a adjustable V-Gouge, I believe it's called. And this is adjustable. They have ones that are just fixed depths, and this one works okay. And where this comes in handy is if I'm folding something over, I'd use it on the inside before I fold this over and glue it and stitch it. I'm using it on the underside of this to help give it a better fold and a little bit cleaner, basically fold over. And I'll show you what that looks like. So say I wanted to make a fold down here, I could use my ruler to help me make my straight line if I wanted to, but with some practice you can get pretty good. Basically this is just gouging out section here, make a gouge, V-Gouge in there. And some people say, you can make one right on the fold line. Other people say you should go to both sides of the fold line and make it a little bit nicer. It'll actually give you a little bit better of a fold. Say I run that through there, and now I want to fold this. And this really thick leather, it makes a difference. It'll just help it fold. And this is a really small piece of leather, but you get the idea. If it basically just takes out some material to allow it to fold a little bit better. I could even probably do some more. There are my lines I just took out. You see how they fold together. Basically just removes material, like I said, just to have it, basically fold a little bit tighter on itself and a little bit cleaner and more controlled. All these, this isn't completely necessary, but on certain applications, I believe it is. Like I said, it's all up to you of how sort of detailed and quote nice you want to make your leather goods, depending on obviously the tools you have. And I do not have all the tools I could use for projects because this stuff gets expensive very quick. The next tool is a rotary punch. And you can see there's a wheel right here with different size holes, diameters. You can rotate this depending on what size you want. I use this from besetting rivets, copper rivets, to create the hole. And there's like maxi punch sets or something like that they're called, where it basically looks like a post with different sizes. But this is the rotary punch, so it's convenient because it keeps them all together. Creates a hole for you. Like I said, depending on what you're using, the size of work, or if you're using a post, depending on the hole size. You get the idea. That's the rotary punch. And I have one more tool here that I want to show you, which is a safety beveler. And what that done is sort of just like you're splitting the leather if you need to. This will be used on belts, or a belt will fold over on itself, but basically it's just meant for taking down the thickness of the leather if you're going to be folding it on itself, pinching it in certain applications, and you should just drag it to yourself. So I might need to change this blade out. I really don't use this tool that much, but basically it's just taking off material to thin this out. Looks like I need to change the blade or sharpen it, but I said I don't use this one that much. But depending on what you want to make, you're going to need something like this. Like I said, just to make it a little bit cleaner, make your projects a little bit cleaner and nicer. So what I've shown you are the tools I'm going to actually use today that I believe are very important to help give you some nice work. I'm going to show you some other tools that are very important in making something, but I'm not going to use them today because I just have scrap stuff, but nonetheless they're still very important depending on what you want to do. So starting here, these are things that you can use to burnish. Well, what's burnishing if you don't know what that means? It's basically taking the raw edge of leather, say this for instance, see how rough it is, blah blah blah. You take your burnisher, get it wet. I can do specific videos. This is sort of just an intro to uses of leather tools. Basically you get this wet, or you can use it when it's dyed, or use some gum tragacanth. Basically you do this with friction. The heat created will seal this up in some methods. So I have this is actually a bolt tool, a turn tool. This is some antler I have that I used as well. That works pretty nice. If you do that correctly, you'll get a really nice seal and sheen on your edges. What this edge looked like before it was dyed was really rough like this, and I've sanded this down with some really fine paper. But if you burnish it correctly, you get a nice seal, nice sheen to it, and that'll seal your edges and just help protect and keep the sheath nicer for longer. And those are two things you can burnish. I've actually used plastic, used pencils, anything smooth and hard to surface. You're going to want to burnish just to give yourself, like I said, just a nicer, cleaner, finished product. Beside that are a pair of needle nose pliers with no grooves in them at all. And what I use this for is basically helping to pull needles through very small holes. Pass a needle through something. For instance, got a hole, I pass the needle through it, it's being stubborn. Well, I held on to it, pull the needle off. That happens sometimes. But I use this, just like I said, just to help pull the needle and thread through small holes. Simple, right? Yerp. And moving on to all this hardware. This stuff is important if you're going to be using rivets or snaps. This, I'll get it out just to show you. And specifically, if you're going to be using snaps, whatever size snaps, glove snaps, segment snaps, line snaps, all those have very specific tools or setters that you need for each one. So this can get very expansive depending on what you're going to be using, what specific hardware you're going to be using. This is just a small anvil type deal. These little, obviously recessed little craters are meant to hold the cap or something like that of the snap or the rivet, depending what you're going to be doing. This big old guy is used for copper rivets. I think I can use it for all the size copper rivets lengthwise. That's why I got this one. And small, like these other ones, are meant for setting line 24 snaps. See, the ends are the important part versus line 20 over here, smaller one. And like I said, if you're going to be using all this stuff, it's going to get pricey quick if you want to use all these different types of hardware. But I just want to show you what you'll need and how much it can add up if you want to be making a lot of different types of things using different types of hardware. And then lastly, I'll talk about today is some contact cement, which is a nice feature to give something strength. I use this on everything, and basically before I stitch it, this is 2 pieces, underside, top side, that was wet formed. I will glue these together with the stitch groove already in place. Well, actually when it's glued, then I'll do that. But I'll glue these together and let this cure for about a day. Sometimes I'll definitely not be that patient, but let this cure for a day, then start working on it. It just gives added strength. The stitching will hold these pieces of leather together, no problem. But this just adds strength to the bond of the pieces, which in turn will help longevity. You just gotta be careful. If you use too much of this, it'll poke out through the seams. I know this is dark. I hope it'll translate some sheen, but if you use too much of this through your pieces, it'll poke out through the seams or where they're touching, and you won't really get a clean sort of burnish because you'll have just pieces of contact cement popping through there. This was just sort of intro type video of some of the tools, how they're used, what they look like, to give you a better idea, maybe give you some ideas. If you want to get into leather work, it's really difficult to sort of make an all-encompassing video because there's so much involved with the leather project, so that's why I try to keep this one sort of simple and skim over things, even though I did go into detail about some things. So if there's any desire, we could potentially try to do some videos on actually making something from start to finish. But because from the beginning of Blackout we set out to film everything outdoors, it presents a problem. But if it's really desired, my brother and I could definitely figure out a way to do that. So if you have any questions, leave a comment below. Don't hesitate. I know there's people watching this video that have probably just as much, if not probably more experience than me working with leather. So, start an exchange, get some knowledge exchanged. This is Krik signing out with Black Outdoors. Later, turtles.